is, I don't hear you. It went away.
I'm still here.
Oh, there. Okay.
Yeah, I'm
It
just
went quiet because that went away too. But okay.
okay. Okay, so this is just the introductory section. It just defines what, in Ayn Rand's definition, reason is.
Yes.
So I was curious what's the difference between that and objectivity, because it was described in the objectivity chapter as volitional adherence to the method of logic. Um, so then, I don't know, like, let's see. Yeah, condensed sensory information in accordance with the requirements of objective cognition by the organizes perceptual units in conceptual terms by following the principles of logic. That's objectivity.
I think the distinction should be more like the faculty or the aspects of your mind specifically that manages to do this, as opposed to the process that it uses. Like reason is more a capacity that humans have, and objectivity is a particular method that they use. That's usually how I think of it. I mean, reason is being the faculty that organizes perceptual units. It's more, I would say it's more broad than specifically objectivity. Reason being just even how you integrate and think as a whole entity, rather than strictly these methods.
So it includes, so objectivity doesn't include organizing perceptual information into concepts?
Not necessarily.
What would be the key difference then? What is like really big in reason that isn't described in that whole section on objectivity?
Well, I would say reason has a lot to do with like how emotions get incorporated into your thinking, which isn't necessarily a volitional method that occurs. You don't create these emotions by some logical method, as much as reason is something is more of a whole faculty of identifying. You can identify different emotions and identify your senses and things like that. Which I mean, and there's a lot of overlap, and in a sense, they could be synonyms. I think objectivity more specifically a method, a verb, and reason is a verb and a thing you do, but it seems more an aspect of like human nature rather than just the methods.
Objectivity was a relationship too between a concept and reality, and it was a method.
Yes.
In this case, reason is a faculty, not a method.
Yeah.
But it includes objectivity. All right, I can come back to that later as well. Explore that. We can skip that. So I think there's also probably some things I explore that are related to that.
Yeah, like it's noting that objectivity doesn't necessarily include the form in which you would perceive things. And that's what it's saying. You don't really have percepts in objectivity. It's not, you can apply use of percepts and things like that, but the faculty highlights three elements. It's data, which is percepts, its form, which is concepts, and its method, which is logic. So like reasoning, like he makes use of, it has concepts, it has information in the form of percepts, and the method by which to incorporate them together, which is objectivity.
Right. Okay, cool. Then I'm going to the next question.
So we could describe this faculty as part relation, part non-relation. Yeah, I would say so, yes.
And the part that identifies similarities and differences as well.
In part, yes. In part. Okay. Not totally, because to differentiate and to identify a difference is more what would be the volitional aspect, to identify what it is, not just to make the distinction happen like perceptually, but like to identify that it's there explicitly.
Yeah,
Like,
I
oh,
mean,
that's red, that's not red. Things like
I,
that.
I don't want to split hairs, so it's okay if we don't get into it. But like, yeah, when I think like identification or whatever, identification of similarities and differences, I'm like, okay, what's similar about this? I ask myself a question, or what's different, and my brain will give me answers, like my subconscious. So that's not the part that's giving me answers is not, the question asking is like I'm choosing to, but if it tells me, well, Jesus, cigarettes, and sex and circlists, like I can't do anything, right? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, the difficulty would be identifying what is there to begin with as a foundation versus what's a judgment or what's based on a judgment. Like your eyes can distinguish outlines of objects, and that's not something you do volitionally. And in a way, you can call that as a matter of identifying difference.
Your
Just
eyes
identify.
can't what? Sorry, I missed
Your
that.
eyes can naturally find the outlines of objects.
Right,
You don't need any like any explicit thing. You
right,
could call that identification, but to recognize that conceptually, to recognize that directly and to be aware of it directly, you'd have to use some volitional thing to identify it. And so that's what I mean by identify there, the explicit way of identifying those things, the explicit method
okay.
of doing that. And yeah,
Um,
a lot of with percepts would be automatic because on that basic level, because the part that's volitional is when you relate them explicitly and recognize it, as opposed to just what your brain does automatically.
yep, got it. Let's see. Is there this will be one, there's a whole bunch of, oh my God. Maybe we'll get it. We'll see. But we don't have to get into this now. We can get into this later. It's about proof. Is there
Yes.
a broader validation proof distinction in philosophy that you're aware of, like a discussion on? Is it similar to when we're talking about reason and how everyone has their own definition?
Um, yeah, it can be really varied depending on the philosopher,
Yeah, okay.
because sometimes they're maybe indistinguishable versus yeah, there's many ways to think of validation. It depends like what you're validating, what you're trying to demonstrate. I think validation here is trying to be a more general term that it doesn't necessarily meet the same standards as like you can completely retrace all your steps in creating it and all that, as much as it applies in reality and it is something real.
Yep. Okay. So I guess I'll find out as I study other philosophers what.
Yes.
Let's see. I
Like
might
that's more, yeah, depending on the philosopher, that one would really vary.
maybe we'll skip these. These look like heavy questions for now, and we can come back. Depending on how we feel later, we can come back. We can come back to them, and maybe they're also ones that are better for written exercise than just live discussion.
Yeah, I think that's more of an exercise sort of thing. I mean, validation and proof, it's not a very fine distinction within, at least the way Rand uses these terms in PFOB. All you have to do is distinguish proof as a very much more rigorous way of following the logic and that you can reach the conclusion based on premise. But the problem with validating something like reason, like you need reason to validate reason, like, or the same way as about you need existence to prove existence. Like you can't go to something before existence. There's no
Right.
premise. That is the premise.
Right.
So it's not a really clear way to describe that. So it uses validation as a way to say like we can make it cohere with reality and make it non-contradictory, but it's not necessarily a rigorous proof that we can do
Right.
because we're using the assumptions we need.
Yep.
And sometimes it might appear circular, but he's not trying to say that we rely on this information to prove something else. Validation is just more to show that it's real, but you can't deduce, you're not using the arguments that existence exists. I don't know that because it exists. Like, no, we're not trying to argue that. We're just trying to say like there's a foundation here and we can't prove those foundations because in a rigorous way because we need those premises in the first place to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. There's different processes maybe of establishing whether or not something is true. And so, um, it just depends on the context. So like, if you need reason to go through a process of proof, which includes using concepts and relying on previous premises and then drawing a conclusion and whatever, like all those ideas, if they depend on reason, then okay, makes sense that reason to validate. You need something else to make sure reason has a true relationship to reality or whatever. So that's sort of vaguely how I get it, but
Yeah, that sounds
um,
right. You need something before it, and there's
yes.
no before existence. There's no before identity.
Yep. Okay, maybe we can do this one because it's not as doesn't look as heavy. Knowledge, thought, ideas. Thought is a process. To have a lot of thoughts chained together is to reach an idea. Do you reckon this is just an arbitrary? And then it said an idea occurs in relation to completion of a work or duty. I just wrote, this is what I wrote because I was trying to.
That seems weird to me too.
It does. Yeah.
I mean, that seems just kind of making a distinction where you need none. Like, I don't see the need for using that distinction anyway. It's like just too complicated. I mean, I guess that person's trying to say that an idea is a matter of something more substantial than a mere thought. Like you have more than
Okay.
one thought. It's like, oh, we're getting at something more interesting. Like a work of art is more than. I mean, that's how I would interpret their idea. But I would say more that I like ideas the same as thought. I use it the same way. So I would say an idea is just. I think it's the same as a thought. And
I like
ideas make theories.
I like your. I actually like the just simply thinking at as it, just simply thinking about it as a matter of degree. So idea being more substantial than thought. Like because if I imagine, for example, if I'm walking down the street and I just have an image of like a bin flying across the street, just a random thought that comes to me and what would happen. Like that's I don't know if that's an idea. That's just like
Right.
just an image. Whereas if I have like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that, that to me would be an idea. So I don't know, maybe
Yeah.
that's
It's more
um
profound. Like, oh, I had an idea. I want to do this. So I had an idea. This is the answer to the problem. Like, that's usually what you would say when you had an idea. The
yes.
light bulb. The light bulb in your
Yeah.
head.
Yeah, or maybe it involves action. I don't know. Anyway, it's cool, I guess, to make those distinctions, but
Yeah.
I like your thing more than a completion of a work or a duty.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, he's sort of right, because like
Sort of.
an idea, there is something there, like an action. I just said, yeah. Um, and then they don't have to be like, so thoughts and ideas don't necessarily have to be knowledge. They're just, I mean, I
No.
don't, it's just
They
a
wouldn't
random,
necessarily be. Yeah. I mean, it might
um,
not even be true. It might not even be a good idea, but it's an idea nonetheless.
yeah, well, an idea can include, I feel like maybe I should have some tea so I can be a
Yeah.
bit more calmer. That's not knowledge or a concept. That's just it implies knowledge and concepts.
Yeah.
So
But
cool.
it's
All right,
not itself a knowledge.
yes. All right, cool. I think I clarified that distinction for myself. It's not
Yes.
significant, but all right, this is next thing is this. I had this discussion with someone and she was saying like, well, relevant to this emotion as a product of ideas section, like you can in childhood you might feel something, you have an association with it, and then you feel again. So that she's saying the feeling leads to another feeling, and it's not that it's thought, it's just it's feeling causes you to think, or causes feeling, rather than thoughts determine feeling. It's like you just feel something, and like let's say you feel pain, and then you have a bad association with it because you were hurt and you're
Yeah.
upset, you cry as a baby, let's say, and then you're like, okay, that's you don't say that's bad, but you just have an association with it of being like unpleasant, and so you just, every time you see it, you feel bad again, and so it's caused by an initial feeling. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, she's more like, she was saying, well, it's possible that feeling leads to thought. Like you feel something in a situation, and then you think because of it, and then you form another feeling.
Mm. I mean, yeah, that is one way of thinking about this. That reminds me of David Hume. Like he thought about like we're a slave to our emotions basically. That our thinking is usually a consequence of our feelings. That we justify our thinking or justify our feelings with reason, things like that. But
Yeah.
we're essentially obeying our emotions, and it sounds kind of like that. I would say there's some validity to it. That, of course, early on, we might associate a feeling with a particular emotion. That, like, you have a tummy ache and you associate that with sadness, maybe. And it doesn't have to be that way. You can even evaluate it later on. And it does get complicated, of course, because I think feeling and emotion occur together. It's hard to separate them. And oftentimes you could have both. You could have thought and feeling at the same time. I don't think you don't have to say one leads the other as much as they're related to one another. That your reasoning can impact your evaluation of your feelings. And your feelings can make you be aware of something that you may have not been otherwise.
And think a certain way too.
Yeah, it could make you, by trying to understand it, you think a certain way. It really could go both directions, I think. Like the origin of an emotion could be distinguished from a feeling. Like a feeling being like the stomach ache or a discomfort that you feel in like your body, as opposed to an emotion like sadness, which is more abstract. It's not like you feel sad. Like there's aspects of feeling sadness, but there's also the cognitive aspects. Like, or I shouldn't say cognitive, but more the more abstract aspects of it, like despair or something like that. Like despair is more than just like some feeling in your body. It's like there's thoughts associated with it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're saying there's a bodily component and there's a mental component too.
Yeah. And when you say that maybe emotions as a product of your thinking, it's more that the way you have the emotion, whether it's sadness or happiness, is a result of your conscious evaluation. But then the feelings themselves, like you have to evaluate the feelings too, like evaluate the sensations in your body as well. So it can be both things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the whole thing of like emotions as a product of ideas um, is that maybe, but it also seems plausible to me to say, well, it could just be emotions as a product of like initial, pre-verbal, like children just doing associations or whatever, and then you feel like you felt bad in a situation because I don't know, you were hurt or something happened, and then you felt an emotion afterwards, and then um, every time you go into that situation again, you feel an emotion, or you go into a similar situation again, you feel an emotion, but it's not like you went through any sort of process of reason. It's just you felt bad in the first instance, and then you just keep feeling bad again by association.
Yeah, I do think that's a possible way some emotions develop. I do think you're right. That's kind of an exception. It's not like I think a lot of situations, yes, it's more like you evaluate a situation and you just by habit continue doing that. This is more derived from the feeling, the sensation itself. And then you think about this feeling and then that can produce
Yeah.
the emotion. In that sense, yeah, I think that's an important distinction to make. And I think maybe Rand didn't appreciate that distinction. I don't think it invalidates really what she's saying, but I do think it's an aspect she neglected to talk much about.
Right. Okay, we can go to the next. We'd probably get deeper into that discussion a bit
Yeah,
later because it's a bit
I know a
relevant.
thread on it too, if you want to look at that.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah,
get to
cool.
later
Yeah, definitely.
about exactly that kind of question. Emotions as product of ideas.
Because, yeah, so this is, I mean, we could probably, the bolds is the only relevant parts here, I think. Without the need of lightning-like rapidity of identification of an evaluation.
Well, how are premises stored? That's the question.
Yeah, because like it's not like you can, let's say you feel something. Some people aren't even aware they feel something. Sometimes I'm not. It takes me a while. But
Right.
you feel something. It's not like you go, ah, this is the premise. There it is, right there. Those are the words for the premise. It's like it's actually so they're clearly not just stored. I don't know. It's super weird. It's not. It's actually not at all directly obvious what.
Yeah, that's definitely a psychology question.
Yeah, I know.
So to follow up on that, yeah. Well, one that would be more the field of memory, some aspect of memory. This would be more like how is it stored? I mean, that's a really interesting topic in psychology. Like, what is is it a set of neurons? Is it a single neuron? Is it a network of neurons? Is it the way the neurons activate? Things like that. Or what relationship does it have with like different neurotransmitters like dopamine? And how are they stored? That's probably the most mysterious thing and kind of what I want to do in psychology. Like, how is it that we have a concept and how do we relate them together to create a new idea? How do we connect these different thoughts? So how are they stored would be the best explanation for that would be some pattern of activation of neurons. Like when you see a stimulus or a cue, the premise gets activated by being reminded of a certain situation. And they
Yeah.
just fire and then they activate. And that's the best example of like being stored I could have.
I
But then you
mean,
could ask what form do you access it once it is formed and stored.
yeah, I'm probably more interested in the latter, less because the biological aspect is less
Yeah,
practical. Like that's the
yeah,
research side. But the latter of like what form is it stored, meaning, um, okay, it's never stored in words. Then you might say, well, it's stored in words. Then when an emotion comes up, if you use words to describe it, all you're doing is using the emotion to rationalize or something like that. I don't know. It can kind
yes,
of act as a guide. Whereas, yeah, obviously, if you know the details of the way the neuron pathways lit up or
yeah.
whatever, it's not really practical for.
I would
Anyway, that's
say,
my interest, but there's different
yeah, the form I would say that's very, I would say usually it's a visual form or visual like form. Like
emotion.
that's what,
Oh, that's interesting. I guess for everyone it's different then, because I don't know if I can't think of any time I felt emotions as visual.
well, an emotion, to me, emotion is more of a, just a somatic thing, a like feeling in my body, in my arms or whatever. It might be just something physical.
Yeah.
Um, I was thinking more the premises themselves. What would the premise be stored as?
Ah, okay.
The premise would be stored as something visual like, I think. And then you could translate that to words to express it, or you could draw it or whatever it might be. And that's how the form it takes in your mind. But there's a lot to research about that because some disagree that how visual it is. Some think it isn't visual at all. Most people lean towards saying it's visual in some way or another.
Is
But
the
beyond that,
only
it's quite mysterious.
Is the only school that's made progress in introspection CBT
Mm,
in identifying like a premise of an emotion?
I don't think so. I know dialectical behavioral therapy is another, it's a type of TBT actually. So in a way you
Okay.
could say yes, it's related to that. Um,
I didn't think DBT was for identifying emotions. Is it?
It's part of it actually.
Oh,
It
okay.
identify what's causing your emotion, like identify both the situation that you were in where it came up, and if you have previous emotions associated with it, if there are other things bothering you about the situation, to help you distinguish what's causing the emotion from things that are unrelated that actually might be causing it. Or like you might think that you're upset because you're you're upset about an argument you had with your friend, but what actually is bothering you is something before that even. It was maybe you broke up with your girlfriend or something, and that's actually what was bothering you all along. It wasn't really the argument with your friend as much as you're using that as an excuse. So DBT
Right.
has helped distinguishing those intense emotions from the more minor emotions, things like that.
Yeah, I mean that just makes the point that it's like you can feel something and then just ascribe certain words or things to it, but it's not true. It just feels because the emotion reminds you of everything that makes you angry or everything that makes you sad. You just think, oh, it's that or it's that. So that's not even. I don't even know if that's thought then. When you do that process, but that's
Yeah,
the point. The point that is like so hard to. It's actually not. This whole theory is like it's I mean what you're saying about DBT, it sounds like there's a process of inference to work out what the emotion is. It's not like you just peer into
yes.
the emotion and go, ah, here's the premise. It's like the brain, the mind, the thinking mind and the emotional part of the mind are separated, and you're like the thinking mind is like, okay, let me see what was the context. It's like not even not speaking to the emotional part, it's just observing it.
Yeah, kind of like that, that you can separate yourself from just strictly the feeling. I mean, you could identify that their reason and emotions connected, but your power of reason allows you to observe your own emotions from the outside,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, okay.
I would say that yes, CBT in general has been really effective at helping people change their behaviors by and large. So rational behavior therapy is a form of CBT, which is exactly what you would think is like using reason to identify your emotions and finding out what's wrong or how to fix them. Same with DBT and other therapies like that. And there's other therapies that are useful depending on the issue. Like there's a humanist approach. It's usually about using philosophy to understand how to examine your life and think about your life. And that's a type of therapy as well. Which
Although
in a
that's not one. I'm referring just to the interest ones that assist in identifying underlying premises of emotions, like
well, I think that
that.
one does too, like identifying philosophical questions to help you think about your emotions, to pick out what's important or what's worth thinking about and what's more shapes you as an individual more than anything.
Hmm.
Sort of like using it like the way of thinking about objectivism, using philosophy to think about reason, purpose, and self-esteem. And that gives you a way to get a handle on your life and even find more motivation to change your life and things like that,
Yeah,
which is different than
I
CBT.
yeah, I agree. Those that's valuable. Although I still don't think it's any of those are like. It's one thing to learn about existence exists, and reason is a tool of cognition while emotion isn't, but it's another to identify premises of your own emotion, because you can get caught up
True.
in like that, like all these schools like CBT and DBT, they separate the reason from the emotion, and so there's still that process of inference, and it's hard because it's like there's no direct peering in. You're like a detective trying to figure out your own mind rather than
Yeah.
here's the answer. Like, you can perceive something, you know it instantly, and whereas in this, like so far in the development of psychology, it is just you've got to like go through it's like, yeah, you're split from your emotion. You're sitting and observing it and going, okay, what is it? Is it that? Is it this? All the while the emotion is influencing your reason, like the thoughts that come up,
Yeah.
like what you think is relevant is being influenced. Anyway, I was just curious what else there was, but so I didn't know DBT was part of that, which is cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Um, okay, this is in terms of like learning, like when you're trying to figure out all your subconsciously held value judgments, it's not like you can just go in and go, oh, here's where they are. It
Yeah.
does seem like there is a process of you have to just do things like, I don't know, read books, like art, uh, you know, experience things, and then when things come up, you had to try your best to identify, hopefully accurately, what or infer the premises as we just discussed, what they are, and that's how you learn about yourself. Because there's no, nothing comes up on its own, basically.
Hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, I agree. That's a big thing to think about. I think that's probably why Nathaniel Branden got into, well, why as a psychologist he found this useful and valuable, and he'd write a book that people can respect about self-esteem because
Right.
it is so complicated. How do we
Yeah.
ever get the right answer? And he's using some premises and objectives that they learned to create a science of self-esteem and self-understanding and
Right.
introspection.
Right. Okay. I've only read one of his books, so it was pretty abstract as well. So
Yeah.
maybe it wasn't the best one, but cool. Um, some of these maybe so like I've talked about similar stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Mental sets. I mean, I think,
Here, for man's basic mental set amounts to the idea
yeah.
that he is a helpless, incompetent caught in an unknowable. I mean, there's sometimes I like the extremes when they illustrate a point, but sometimes I'm just like, what is he talking about? Where are these people in an unknowable jungle that have a mental set that amounts like, yeah, anyway, I was lost on that. I get lost on when he gives some of these examples.
Yeah, I think that might be a bit extreme the way he's putting it too. But I think just by mental set, he just meant like considering everything they think about, essentially this is what they think. It
Yeah,
amounts
okay.
to this. It's just a way of phrasing it, not a important concept.
I don't know I'm not sure what the reference to an unknowable jungle is. You don't know either, right?
No, I think it's
Yeah.
just a description. It's just not a reference to anything, just a description.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he's a very smart guy, so I don't want to be like, oh, well, that doesn't. I'll just go. I don't know. I'd love to ask him who are these people in the unknowable jungle. Maybe he'll tell me it is just to illustrate a point. I don't know. But anyway,
Yeah, I mean, I
yeah,
would agree that I'd want a more concrete example, not just this poetic description. Like, I
yeah,
don't reference something, whether it's a fiction or real life or whatever it might be. And that's why I like when he talks about philosophers of ancient Greece, because he gives a specific reference to an idea. He's not just saying, oh, some guy might believe this. Like, no, here's a guy that actually did this. So I like
maybe
his those examples.
maybe Peter Keating,
Yeah,
because he can't rely on himself to make a value like to think through problems. Like he wouldn't have any confidence in it. Like he knows he can't design buildings.
yeah,
um and so it's kind of a scary place to be when you can't rely on yourself. You've got to you're so dependent on it. You don't know this, everything's swirling around you. And you just feel anxiety all the time. Maybe some of that, I have no idea. Yeah.
yeah. It's more along the lines of that. I think is kind of what he's trying to describe here.
I'd still need to, but yeah, like more concrete would be better, but whatever, we'll skip it.
Yeah,
Um, what is this? Effective? Is that, I've heard that term before. Like I've heard some,
affective, emotional,
yeah, is it
filled with
exactly the same?
emotion.
Exactly, because I saw relating to moods, feelings, and that. Why do people
Yeah,
use that? Are they just trying to be fancy or something? Because
I would
I've
say
heard,
being fancy.
yeah, okay,
Yeah,
cool.
I think so.
Yeah, I was like, I was in a philosophy chat and someone was like, well, art is affective too. And I'm like, well, what does that even mean? I don't know. So,
It produces an emotion,
okay.
produces affect. That's all it
All
means.
right.
But I mean, I would say emotional life. I think is a bit. What's the word? It's
Better.
not. Whatever. I can't think of the word right now.
Yeah, okay. All right, cool. Skip it. Um,
But I just want to say evaluative being what you consciously decide or judge things to be, and affective just being what you feel. That's all.
being what? The feeling.
Yeah, affective, just emotion.
Yeah, okay. Hey, I think I asked this later, but I might as well ask it now because it relates to all of this section. It seems like this whole section is based on inference. Like, it's not that you can directly recognize, oh, well, yes, emotions are based on premises. You really have to reason it out, and then you don't have like a direct way to perceive it. You reason it out and you go, well, look at this case. Like, all these men are looking at this slide and they're reacting in different ways based on their context. So it must be based on their knowledge, which we know is based on concepts, which we know is based on perceptions and observations and volition. And so therefore emotions must be automatic things, which are based on our previous reasoning. It's not like you can go, I can see the premise of that emotion, therefore all emotions are based on reason.
Mm-hmm.
So it is some kind of um, logical inference, right, to say that emotions are a product of ideas. There's
Yeah.
no like directly perceivable evidence. It's more just you make a logical leap in the same way that you do when you say all men are mortal.
Yes, like that kind of thing. It's a conclusion you reach. You can say an induction you reach too by generalizing different things, but either way, yeah, you could perceive directly. It has to
Yeah.
be more abstract.
Got it. And so you might not have like, when I'm confronted with an emotion, I'm like, well, I don't see how it's based on an idea. I just, it's more like I have some evidence to show me that all emotions are based off ideas. And so I make in the same way that I go, well, I can't look at some man in the street and go, how do I know he's mortal? Like you based it you said induction. I don't know what the difference between induction and inference is.
Induction being like forming the concept, and induction being reaching new knowledge. Deduction meaning using what you already know to come to a conclusion,
But
basically.
inference and induction.
Inference would be more like induction because you're trying to reach some new idea, new thought. You're trying to take what you have, but then reach a new conclusion. Like you're gonna infer that. I guess there's some vagueness in the term, but I would say inference is usually inductive because you take some information, you're trying to figure out what it means, then you figure it out eventually. Like a
Is it the
detective.
same, or is there some essential? Is there some distinguishing aspect of?
Um, an inference could be deductive, I think. If it's like we were talking about the other day about like, well, no, I wouldn't say it usually is inductive. Like Sherlock Holmes, like he's taking all the clues and forming an idea as a result of all that. He didn't begin with the answers, nor was it already available to him. He's just using things he doesn't, things he knows, to reach something he doesn't know.
Yeah.
If
Okay.
that
Well,
makes sense.
I wrote. Yeah, it does. I wrote down inference versus induction. I can look at it later since it's a
Yeah,
minor epistemological. So we can skip that.
yeah.
But I mean, you can see in this section here, like the reason I was excited about this, even though it seems simple, is because I highlighted, because I was like, I thought I needed to be able to prove it by observation, but I guess if it's not true, if I can get to the point where I am certain that emotions are products of ideas, then I'm not worried if I don't know the source of an emotion. I can go, okay, so it is a bit of a process of like inference to actually work out what the premise of the emotion is, and it might be one where you need to feel the emotion in multiple contexts to like get an
Yes.
accurate perspective.
Yes, I would
Because
say so.
I think I always thought that you could just look in and identify the premise, but then I'm like, that doesn't work. So,
Yeah,
um,
you don't just open up your skull and like, oh, there it is. There's my
yeah, yeah.
premise.
Well, it doesn't feel like that
No,
anyway. It's more like you think, oh, it's this, and then you're like, oh no, it can't be that. I was just saying that because that's how I felt, and it's anyway, it's a tricky. But it's if you can say
yes,
for certain that they're a product of ideas, and you're okay with the fact that you don't always know, and you know it's because of its a logical induction or an inference that all emotions are sources of ideas. That's pretty powerful,
yes,
at least to me.
yeah.
Um,
And of course, if you question it, you can try to validate it too, like, or to reduce it, like take that abstraction, try to find those concrete examples.
of the emotion being a source of ideas.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, like that, like we've talked about.
And then you've got to, I guess you've probably got to do a bit more to really be certain that you're like, especially in those cases where it's harder to work out.
Yeah, I
Anyway,
would say so. Yeah, just more work sometimes.
okay, cool. So it is, I was right there. That's cool. Um, okay. This is, again, I think this is a psychology question because he says what makes emotions incomprehensible to many people is the fact that their ideas are not only largely subconscious but also inconsistent because you feel one thing and then you feel another. And I was wondering if like I don't know if this is less I think the chemical aspect and more the just the psychological research. Like if your ideas were conscious at one point, um, they might become subconscious later, or then even just completely forgotten, but still triggering emotions. I wonder if that's a
Probably. I mean, that seems like something that could happen, like that you've habituated it so much that you don't really think about it anymore, and it could even be forgotten what it was even based on in the first place. I mean, that could just happen. Just over time, memories decay and they eventually disappear. So yeah, if you're not actively bringing it out, you're not actively reflecting on it or thinking about it, it will be forgotten. But I do think it'd be possible to still have the emotion be produced, even if the memory wore off. Like the conscious memory wore off, your body still has a sense of memory, like say reacting to a situation, like in the same way your body reacts to like you see a bear, your heartbeat's probably gonna go up a lot just because you see the bear and recognize it that sort
um
of way.
I guess the thing with that then would be like, well, it's weird to use forgot because does that mean
Yeah.
it's not even in your subconscious? I don't know, like that. I don't,
Usually
not sure.
forgot would mean you could never retrieve it no matter what you do. Like there's no trace of it, it's gone.
Although,
That's
how often are there things that you've forgotten and then later remembered? Like just a random memory will come to you of something that, whoa, as if I remember that, like from childhood. That just some moment where you're like, how is it possible when there was you didn't even feel anything strong? It just randomly by association came to you. So it's pretty hard to.
I would almost doubt the validity of those because being a memory researcher, I know that you can confabulate, as they call it, that you create a story and that feels so real, you're pretty sure it happened. And that does happen to people, especially as you grow older, like because when your memory grows weak or you're not as able to recall as many things, you accidentally make up stories like they feel real, but they aren't.
Right.
And that's a concern sometimes that if something just came you couldn't remember, then all of a sudden it appeared, like you might not be sure about it. I mean, that's one of the difficulties of introspection, that there's really more uncertainty than Peikoff even acknowledges, because even introspection can be more problematic than I think he indicates, like based on your own biases or previous thoughts that you haven't questioned enough, or even being influenced by your own emotions can make it very, very difficult.
Yeah, I agree. And like you said, also just forgetting things and not like overlooking facts that it's not even
Yeah.
intentional. You just forget relevant information um, for a while. Or yeah, what you said about the emotions is real true as well. Like if you feel sad, then you find facts to support. It's like you're using, I don't even know if it's thinking. You're using your reason to, and I don't even know if it's like
I would
actively
just I just call that
malicious or whatever.
rationalizing.
Yeah, but it's not. It doesn't. It doesn't seem like that. It's honestly like those are the facts that are presented to you and that you remember, and then the rest you kind of just forget, and you're like, oh, so yeah, my life is meaningless, or whatever when you're depressed, because you just remember the facts that are like supporting that, in that
Mhm.
moment. But it's not. I don't. It's not as simple as like, oh, well, you got to use your reason. If you feel a very strong emotion, you can't necessarily even recall the appropriate facts.
Mhm. There is a social psychologist who researches this, Jonathan Haidt. He
I know him.
researches this kind of, yeah, and he wrote a paper like about like the idea that, I don't know if it's a quote from the paper or what, but like, does the tail wag the dog or does the dog wag the tail? The tail being
Okay.
the tail being reason. Like the tail might feel like it's doing things, but no, the dog is doing everything, and
Yeah.
it's just coming up with reasons after the fact, which
Yeah,
is
I think
something to
that
watch out for.
I think so. I think there's something to that. And I guess it kind of goes against this though, right? Like well,
Kind of.
it just says it's not as simple. It doesn't mean you can just use your reason. It's more like, okay, you're in a bad mood, you might need to wait a day, look for facts and wait another day. And then
Yes.
it takes like it's like rather than an introspection, it's more like you feel something and it might take like 6 months to figure out what the premise is.
Yeah, or
So
be aware of the things that can occur that your immediate inclination might not be the right one, that you need time to think things out. I mean, the right answer doesn't have to always come immediately. Some
yeah.
days it just means you gotta wait. It doesn't contradict anything about Rand as much as there's a lot to our thinking, and we can't take for granted what leads us to a mistake sometimes. A
Hmm.
mistake would be being a mistake. Like,
Yeah.
just because you felt something, it doesn't mean your immediate answer is always the right one.
Yeah. Yeah. Agree.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, oh, the other thing is with this, he's saying that ideas are largely subconscious. Put aside forgetting or memory for now. If something is subconscious, then it might at some point no longer be uh, put in words, meaning like you're not like, um, this slide means this and this and this, or this thing. I'm trying to think of a concrete example. It's so hard. Um, what would be a? I can't think of one now. But the point is like the premises aren't in words, so you have to infer them. Okay, if I feel this and this in this situation, and I felt something similar in that another situation, the implication means the universe is an incomprehensible chaos or whatever. Even though you'd never normally
Yeah,
put the words on the belief, you're sort of backing it out by implication because there's no words there to tell you that.
yeah,
Does that make sense?
it does.
Out by implication. Like the universe is a scary place, or whatever that CBT core belief is, or whatever. But
Yeah,
so that would make a case for like then clarifying concepts, educating yourself, so you can then label, like you can identify the implied beliefs, or back out implied beliefs from emotions, maybe, and then go, this is a premise that I have.
yeah. I mean, that would be the process you would go through. Yeah. Um, Let me think about this a bit more. Um, well, in a way, riding a bike can be thought of as automatizing something. It's implicit knowledge or implicit memory, as they call it, where at one point you may have learned all these specific things and you can put into words exactly each little thing about, but eventually it's just you do it automatically without even thinking about it. And that would be hard to even know what it is you do in the same way. Like, how does a baseball player tell how he hits a ball? Um, it's not a matter of, oh, swing this way or that way. there's all the little things happening with their muscles and whatnot. So early on, you might be able to identify all these little things you're doing, but the more you automatize it, the more difficult it would be to express anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if
But
you
through a
forget
lot of
forget the concepts behind it, like
or just not even stop thinking about, just you do it so automatically or by habit that you need to like maybe take a few days to think about it, what you do, to take it all apart and say what is it that I do, or
well,
what is it that I need to learn to do that.
yeah. I mean, some things are bodily too, right? Like if you're talking
Right.
about riding a bike,
Yeah.
there's engaging like muscles and sense of balance and that kind of thing. So
Or we could
different.
think of even reading sometimes. Like I have no idea how I learned to read English. It's just I know I did in kindergarten, knew how to read, and
Yeah.
that was that. And I mean, I can sort of remember because when I learned how to read Japanese, I can kind of remember what I did, but some of it's just automatic enough that I just know what the letter is, and I don't know really how I got to know that
Yeah.
or what premise it even needed. So that's maybe a better example, is because it's not a physical thing, but there's so much information there that it was when you were doing it, but at some point it's just you forgot all the explicit stuff and it's just the letters.
Right. It's implicit. So you have to. Then I guess it's normal to often go through a process of like um, backing out the implication out of an emotion or something like that. Like it's not in words. It's you just got to through looking at context and then deducing and then seeing is it this, is it that, like hypothesis testing your own emotion, which is weird to think that
Yeah,
they're like almost separate and you have to like the reason has to go, let me just hypothesis test this guy while he tries to influence me. It's not like you just look in and yeah, okay. I think that's more
yeah,
evidence that it is that kind of process.
yeah,
Um, Yeah, so accepting by implication was interesting to me, like an idea you accept by implication and how that works. I guess that's non-volitional. Like, I remember I was listening to an interview that with I think Don Watkins saying something like, by the way, his commentary on OPAR is great, saying something like, our brains are automatic generalizing machines, so either we do it or they just
yes,
generalize. How, yeah, that's so I guess there's like because even in the philosophy who needs it essay, like that's what Ayn Rand says, something like our brain's always doing adding and like generalizing and creating a philosophy, whether we choose it or not.
yes,
So
yeah,
yeah, that's pretty. So we obviously don't know much about that process. Like the process of generalizing, the volitional aspect is just there to check whether it's been done correctly or not. Like that happens automatically almost.
yeah. I think it has to do with the amount of focus you have, like to what degree you're focusing. Like you can kind of, I think it goes from a degree of like being focused, really thinking about what comes from what, which idea leads to what, to more like you'll just kind of do whatever just by association and not really think it through on the very opposite end, where you're just groping and something in between where you have a good idea of what you want to think about, but sometimes you might make some mistakes and overthink something or blame yourself too much or things like that. And it just kind of happens. So it really can only be influenced by like how much focus you have. Not that it's purely automatic, but that the less you focus, the more it just happens more by chance or randomness or no particular principle.
Although going back to what you said a couple of conversations ago as well, is like how it's hard to know because how much of it is like premises you form as a child that are automated thinking, like, process of
Right.
generalizing that is from previous thoughts or
Yes.
however primitive the thoughts are, and then that informs the way you automatically generalize. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. Because just like with emotions, you can't directly peer in and go, here is the source of emotions. Because if that were true, then why would there even be an argument between philosophers going back, like 3,000 years about where emotions come from, right?
Yeah.
So if emotions are that difficult to to come up with some theory for where they come from, then I'm pretty sure it's going to be hard to work out. Like, how the hell do you work out how much of your thinking is volitional, whether present or way in the past,
Yeah,
and how much is non-volitional? Like, that's also going to be as difficult as probably working out the source of emotions.
yeah, I think so. I think just to mention, like in the past maybe 20 years, a lot of work has been done on what the brain can kind of do automatically to help you integrate thinking and ideas and predictions and all that. Like, how would you know that apples are always going to be apples? Like, there's some amount of automatic processes the brain goes through about combining ideas and probabilities and things like that. It's very, very dense stuff. It is basically a science of to what extent your mind is automatically assembling things and to what extent are you actively participating as a volitional focusing agent, focusing
Yeah,
person.
although again, it is tricky because how do you evaluate how much of those automatic processes were based on previous thoughts?
Right, that's very difficult. And that is probably the biggest, yeah, ongoing problem in psychology.
Yeah, and it would be anyway. I'm just